Okay, yeah. So thank you guys for joining and being here live. It's always nice to have a couple people to talk to. So yeah, we're going to be doing our last lecture. This is where now we are past our odor discrimination. The dogs have seen some different contexts as far as how the odor is presenting itself. And then we're going to start introducing area hides to them and kind of showing them, hey, now your odor could be in these other contexts, and you're still going to get paid for it. So it's kind of the final step of our process. And then once we're doing this, we're still going to go back to foundations regularly. So we don't forget our foundations. We're still going to be using that. So if we have an issue pop up with the dog, we see that there's, a gap in their understanding somewhere, that's where we take it back to our foundations, whether we're working odor discrimination because we're going to work a distractor, or our indication is needing a little bit of cleaning up, so we're working in the dopamine box. Those foundations are still always going to be something that we cycle back to throughout our training. Like with Gus and my finished dogs, I probably never go really longer than a couple months before I cycle back and do some foundational stuff, even if it's just kind of advancing my proofing or, challenging them with that. So, don't forget that stuff. That is always important, even as you progress into these area hides. So we will go ahead and jump into our lecture here. Let me share my screen. Okay. And so before we go into this, do you guys have any questions about kind of what we've worked on up to this point, or what we want to see before we're at this point in time? Okay, we'll jump right into it. Okay, so I typically will start our dogs with interiors. So a lot of people on the sport side start with containers because I think partially because we have this idea of like jumping into ORTs, because NACSW, was a big founder of the sport. So boxes becomes kind of the first thing to go to. I like to wait until my dog is really understanding their indication and they've worked odor in some different contexts before I introduce containers, because I want to make sure I really prevent things like box smashing or being destructive of that search area. I want my dog to be pretty clear about that communication system before we get to that. So I typically go into containers last. So I start with interiors. And the reason for that is it's a pretty easily kind of controlled setup, right? So you're not dealing with the same kind of environmental factors as, say, exteriors where you have, maybe animals around or, different people. I can really control things a lot with an interior setup to try to make it very simple initially for my dog. And so I'll kind of go through that until I'm seeing some level of kind of proficiency with interiors, and then kind of move beyond that. And I might then go to exteriors or vehicles and things like that. But I typically am going to start kind of showing my dog, hey, odor could be anywhere with my interior hide. So this is little Onyx. This is one of his first kind of area hides. So he's had a lot of foundational work. He's solid on his indication with pipes, different types of, hard type of boxes. We use a lot of the Hunden Sport boxes that have the 9 holes on the top, similar to the Hunden Sport dopamine box, if you guys are familiar with that. So he's seen a lot of contexts like that. These kind of what we call foundational concepts. And now we're starting to take it into the real world. So this is one of his first kind of interior hides like this. So this room that we're in, this is like a vacant apartment unit. And so there's not a whole lot going on here other than the area we want him to work. So he's going to take off towards kind of an obvious sort of visual pole, which is an open drawer. And we're going to mark him pretty quickly. And so the goal of this with him here is just showing him that, hey, this is productive. So even though there's not a bunch of pipes or this other, kind of picture that you're used to, you can still find odor here. So he goes right away into indication, which is nice, but we're not necessarily expecting that. So if he wasn't to go, if he just stopped and went, whoa, odor, we would mark that. And so you see in the kitchen space, if I can back it up a little bit, we have that drawer open but we also have some of the other cabinets open. So the idea is that it's kind of something, a visual that he's going to want to investigate, because we want to kind of draw him in with something like that. So then he goes, wow, odor. And then we can mark that. We can kind of take advantage of that, capture that, and mark him and let him know, yes, that's correct. Your odor is there. And as he progresses, we'll start reducing that visual component. So we're going to start closing stuff up. And the other kind of aspect with this is odor availability. So with the open drawer, odor is coming out very easily. Whereas as we start closing it, he's going to have to really work that seam. And that takes a little bit of practice for them to understand where should they be working odor. So I want them to feel pretty comfortable that, hey, your odor's in the space before I add additional challenges like him needing to really work the seams to be able to find odor. Does that make sense to you guys? Kind of why we have it set up like that? Go ahead, Brian.
Hey, I've seen it done and a couple other places where
Sure.
when you move to like an interior room like this, you would use something that the dog is familiar with as well. If you
Like
do
putting
paint cans a lot,
sure, yeah,
have a
absolutely.
couple paint cans in there just so they kind of like know that it's the same game being played. Like, what's your opinions on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And as we do that. So I'll show you that in some further slides that we have. But
Okay.
one thing we do want to kind of keep in mind, I really like doing that for introducing new environments and making sure my dog understands that we can play this game here. However, and so some dogs, this works really well where, okay, say we still kept the hide in this drawer, but I want to draw the dog into the area. So I put my paint cans that they're used to checking around it. Sometimes it's the paint cans end up being such a visual draw that the dog won't check anything else. And then a lot of times what they'll want to do is like indicate towards at the closest paint can. And then we're like, oh, well, it's not in I know they're on odor, but they're thinking that it's in the paint can. And so we kind of lose that opportunity to say it's in the environment now. So I do use that method for some dogs. But if we can kind of get away with doing it without that, or just kind of capturing the dog working the environment without the visual pull, sometimes that can be a little bit cleaner, pretty dog dependent. So you could absolutely try that. For some dogs, it works really well. I use that with a lot of my early on sport dogs. And we would do like, we would have our boxes out and that would pull them into the area. And then they'd go, wow, then there's odor over here. But as I've kind of seen it, we've done it more and more with the working dogs. It just ends up being like such a visual pull that it kind of almost takes away from them just working the area. So it's usually a little bit like kind of streamlined to not do that. But I would totally say that it depends on the dog. So it wouldn't be a bad option to do if the dog was working the space and not just super focused on that item.
Okay, and maybe if you've got a dog that's not as like drivey for it, if you've got a dog that just needs a little motivation to get started,
sure, yeah. Like if you had a dog where they weren't necessarily going to go right in and work the space, you could absolutely use something like that. The goal, with following kind of our system is that by the time you're here and you're putting odor out in these spaces, your dog has had a lot of opportunity and a lot of kind of practice with searching for their toy or their food in these kind of environments. So they almost will automatically start searching it because they're so used to that game. But for sure, anytime you have a dog that's going to present a little bit different, there's nothing wrong with kind of trying different things. The dog will tell you what makes sense to them. And if it's making sense to them and you're able to kind of peel those extra kind of helper layers away back to, an operational or trial looking setup, then it's a good option. Yeah, I mean, I'm a big advocate for if you have a dog that's not responding to one way you're doing it, try doing something else. Something that's going to, hopefully keep the handler out of it as much as possible. Like I wouldn't want to go, okay, my dog's not searching, so I'm going to come in and make them detail. I'm going to point to everything or I present everything. We wouldn't want to do things that are going to pull the handler into it. But if you kind of play around or find other ways to draw the dog into the space and have them search and kind of discover odor on their own, and then we can capture that. Definitely you can try different things.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Let's